Canada's Agricultural Industry by Brian Renner, Hunter Hobbs, Jonathan Mann, and Nathan Bender.
The leading agricultural outputs of Canada. The top 5 agricultural commodities produced by Canada are canola, cattle and calves, beef and veal, vegetables, and poultry. I put some pictures on the bottom left here. Next is the leading agricultural exports for Canada. The leading agricultural exports in Canada are beef, cattle, soybeans, pork, wheat, and canola. They export these items to multiple countries, the main being the United States of America, China, Mexico, and Germany. Those countries are listed in descending order of trade value. The leading agricultural imports of Canada: biscuits and wafers, rapeseed oil, beef and beef variety meats, coca and coca preparations, pork and pork variety meats. The main importer for Canada is the United States of America, who is their biggest trading partner regarding pretty much everything. Then another source of their imports is China.
Trade relationships with the United States. Canada is one of our closest allies, both geographically and economically. Since we share such proximity to them, it is very easy for us to trade with them. Before 2020, the US, Canada, and Mexico had a trilateral trade agreement called NAFTA, which is short for North American Free Trade Association. During July of 2020, though, the agreement changed its name to USMCA, which is an acronym for the names of the countries involved. The US ships a lot of goods to Canada, a whole $25 billion worth in 2021. The top 5 Canadian imports from the US in 2021 were baked goods, cereals, and pasta with $2.2 billion, fresh veggies with $1.9 billion, fresh fruit with $1.7 billion, food preparations with $1.19 billion, and lastly, non-alcoholic beverages with $1.17 billion. From the USDA's ERS, the US accounts for over half of Canada's exports at 54.4%, and even more of its imports at 57%. The top 5 Canadian exports to the US are processed foods at 11.4 billion, and grains at 3.2 billion, red meat at 2.3 billion, live animals at 1.7 billion, and fresh fruit at 1.2 billion. Now let's take a look at the ag productivity of Canada. Canada's agricultural industry employs 2% of the total Canadian workforce, according to the CIA World Factbook. The ag sector produces $134.9 billion worth of, which is worth 6.8% of the total GDP of Canada. And lastly, the amount of arable land per capita is 1.0052 hectares per person.
Two authentic Canadian dishes include poutine and maple taffy. Canadians love poutine so much they celebrate International Poutine Day on April 11th of each year. Poutine is made with French fried potatoes, white cheddar cheese curds, and gravy. The main commodities for this dish are potatoes and dairy. First, make the gravy using beef and chicken broths, thickened with a rouge of butter and flour, then seasoned with salt and pepper. Cut russet potatoes into 1/4 inch sticks and deep fry, then season with salt. To serve, stack French fried potatoes on a plate, sprinkle with cheese curds, and cover it with gravy. Maple taffy is a traditional Canadian treat made with maple syrup. Canada is the world's largest producer of the commodity of maple syrup. To make maple taffy, pour boiling maple syrup in a line on fresh packed snow or crushed ice. Lay a stick at one end and quickly roll up the maple taffy.
Work life of an average farmer in Canada. If you look at my graph here, you'll notice that the average farmer in Canada is a male aged 55 years and up. The average crops that are used in Canada on farms are wheat, canola, and lentils, and these farms cover 7% of Canada's land mass. The other land that's not used for this 7% of farms is taken up by cattle, poultry, and pork. And the typical farm size in Canada is 800 acres. The average household on a Canadian farm is 2.9 people per farm, which rounded up to 3 is 3 people. The standard equipment used on farms in Canada include chisel plows, air seeders, combines, and diesel tractors. And then on cattle farms, they also have access to round balers and grinder mixer equipment. The farms sell 70% of their soybeans, 70% of their pork, 75% of their wheat, 90% of their canola, 95% of the pulses they produce, and they export half of their beef and then half of their cattle. And they send these all to agricultural companies. About a year ago, they would have sent them to the Canadian Wheat Board, but that was changed. So now they can sell them to companies like Bar Ag, which is a Canadian grain and hay producer that offers competitive prices for these products. And the challenges faced on Canadian farms are crop protection, climate change, soil conservation, and animal and human health. They use a lot of fertilizers and herbicides and things like that to maximize their output, which is not great for the soil. So they have to divert effort to prevent runoff. Then they use contour plowing and soil conservation efforts to limit soil degradation and soil erosion. And they have to contend with drought and heat in their farming. As far as the animal and human health, they limit the use of antibiotics on Canadian farms so they can better be used to treat people. And they prefer to practice extensive farming practices with their excess land so the animals have a better quality of life.